So I'll just get kind of started and talk about a little bit about this event. Does anybody tune in and participate in last year's May the 4th event? So a handful of folks. So Microsoft decided kind of in the changing the new way of doing things. There's a number of events that have all kind of consolidated now into the annual events where they have Build for engineering for developers. They have Ignite, which is the IT Pro Admin conference. There's what was the World Partner Conference, Inspire. That is for partners. And then there is the Envision, which is the business decision maker side of things, which is now jointly done with the Ignite conference. And so as they consolidated this, one of the things that kind of fell away was the SharePoint conference, which was this massive global event. And they knew they needed to do something different. There's so much that was happening around SharePoint they needed to get out. That was that May the 4th event. Well, here we are a year later, and while there was the reports out of Redmond was that there was nothing as groundbreaking, earth-shattering as the announcements that were being made a year ago, there was still a lot of innovation that was happening at a very rapid pace, and that they wanted to have an event to kind of share the updates of the news. And that was this May 16th event, this virtual summit. So that's something that, well, whether Microsoft continues to do that or they fold those kinds of announcements into other events is something I think still to be decided. There's still enough change, enough things that are going on in the new evergreen model that we wanted to talk about this and don't put together this panel to go through and talk about some of those pieces. How are we doing on adding other people?
We have Lorian in, and we're just trying to connect Mark Kashman, and I'm duplicating the screen. So is that cool?
There we go.
Yeah, I'm quite okay with showing you under the covers as I'm trying to make this happen. Thankfully we're helped out by a company called Pexip that helps us to bring different Skype for Business people into this meeting experience and stream it out to YouTube Live and Facebook. Just having a little trouble, but let's introduce Lorian, who has a nice white box over the top while we're inviting Mark in there. So say hello, Lorian. Can we hear you there?
Hi, everybody.
All right, we'll just beef up that.
Apologies for the glorious background setting. I'm actually sitting in a hotel.
Cool, thanks, Lorian. We'll keep trying to get Mark in there.
There's Lorian. We can see you now. Excellent.
So we know it works because we've got Lorian in.
It might be that my head's too big to allow anybody else in.
It might be. If you notice Lorian's domain name there, it's the cloud mouse, so that's also another significance of his presence.
There's only so much ego that Skype can handle.
Yeah. I'm going to try a couple more ways to try and get Mark in because this is obviously not working.
Well, we've got a number of topics that we're obviously going to cover. I don't know how you want me to start.
Yeah, so just start off with some of the things that we mentioned at SPC, because there were a number of announcements, a lot of new things, a lot of things that were being improved and added to. So if you could just do a recap of that.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot that happened here. I just pulled up the list here because I think what's interesting too is we all kind of focused on different things, and there were actually things that I highlighted as I was going back through my notes. I was sitting there, actually did a virtual viewing party with my user group in Salt Lake City. And so we had about 40, 50 people sitting in a room watching the screens. and we had side conversations. Something was announced, talked about, had side conversations going on. I realized how much I missed afterwards by comparing notes with others, like things I just didn't hear because I was talking to somebody about other updates there. But you had some of the major things that we're talking about, like the files on demand, so the OneDrive updates, so being able to identify content, flag it for offline usage and auto sync. So that was a big one. Power Apps coming to on-prem, so the updates there. So the focus on, well, there's the 4 pillars. We'll give you about half this. But one of them was the sharing with confidence, so that files on demand, changing the whole sharing experience within Office 365 and making it easier and more clear in those the sharing windows of what you're actually sharing, opening up, and the permissions that you're giving out there. So navigation changes between Office 365 group modules, making sure that it's uniform, and then bringing the SharePoint intranet sites into Teams so that you can actually add a SharePoint site as part of a Microsoft Teams experience. Lorian, what jumped out to you? Rather than me reading the list of everything that was discussed, what stood out to you with the announcements?
To me was, to be honest, the communication sites, I think, was the real thing that jumped out, because I've found that modern sites have been great, but very limited. So they're great for the average end user who's not really that familiar with SharePoint. But if you are familiar with SharePoint, they're extremely restrictive. So seeing more feature-rich sites being built that will give people more customization, I think, and more features, I think, is the thing that really jumped out at me. That was kind of the thing that I kind of looked at and went, hallelujah.
Sure. And there were a lot of pieces that were within that, the communication sites as well. I know there were questions about whether, hey, is this the answer to publishing sites? And it's like, no, it's not a replacement of, it's not the answer to that. It's part of that story, the publishing story. But there were a lot of things like the people card, you had the new event web part, you had a lot of pieces that were kind of part of that story. Oh, I see Mark Kashman's face.
Hoorah! Team effort.
Hello.
So, Mark, I don't know if you heard any of that. We're just kind of going through and started to talk about things that kind of stood out. I mean, I know you were part of the team compiling the list, but I mean, what are the things which you're just really most proud of, or just really just kind of jumped out that you focus on as you talk to customers?
And this is specifically about some of the new announcements, or in general?
Yeah, correct, about the summit. Mark, the focus of this panel, yes.
Yeah. So biggest thing for me is communication sites. We are adding to the portfolio of the intranet as Microsoft and SharePoint, OneDrive, and Yammer offer. And the communication sites are awesome. They're not out yet, so I know I can only speak by what my eyes have seen and used and what you've seen in screenshots, GIFs, and demos, but they really are great sites to be able to add the portfolio of people building from collaboration and turning to then communicate to the rest of the org, be it full company-wide, very direct and distinct to organizations and whatnot within the company. But they work great. They're easy to set up. They're easy to add components to with web parts and your pictures, your videos, your images, your documents, really you name it across the board. And they're mobile ready. So a lot of the really interesting use cases come from how do you communicate to people when they're out and about. And, clicking a link, does it send them to a blocker in the past, where it was a SharePoint site that you couldn't access? These you can access from your whatever device, whether it's a tablet, whether it's a phone, whether it's PC, Mac, whatever platform, and we're super proud of that.
Yeah, that concept of sometimes you just want to share things out, you want to curate what information needs to go out to an organization. It might be your team of 10 people, might be your entire business unit, the entire company, and then decide, hey, this is the information that I need to make available to them without having to go through that process of figuring out all of the permissions and issues with opening up like your SharePoint site to everybody and all of that information. You can curate that experience, and that's really what the communication sites do. see. What else?
Yeah, well, I think around that communication site, there was something that took something of a resurgence with SharePoint, and some people have questioned what's Yammer been up to lately. They seem to have faded off in the background, not doing a lot to refresh the capabilities, and everyone's sort of looking in other directions. And then in comes Yammer in this virtual summit, quite to some people's surprise as to what they've been working on and what they've managed to release. So the real focus around Yammer within the new SharePoint features coming out and experience, especially around the communication site, is extending that conversation across the organization. So is anyone using Yammer at all here in their orgs? Yeah, a few. Okay, so if you are using Yammer, you can embed this into the SharePoint experience at the moment. There's been a web part in various different forms for a little while now, but within the Office 365 experience, they're working on a new modern web part that's supposed to make it a lot easier to bring that conversation in and make it as part of the experience within the communication sites.
Yeah, and really on that Yammer web part, which is I think a great way to think about some of these modern web parts and how they're connected, you'll be able to do three things you haven't been able to do. Obviously, you'll be able to have a web part that's embedded in a modern page that looks great on web, but big thing really with the introduction here is though that it renders and is interactive and mobile as well. You'll be able to do stuff with documents right in line in the embedded experience. And even though it might seem a little strange, you can do now an all-company feed on something like a communication site, which makes sense. With the embed code, you were limited to be only targeted at groups, but not the all-company feed. So that's, the framework has allowed us to make it better, and certainly the Yammer scenarios just get better when you can do that much more.
That's a great point, because that's important. You might have a communication site that is kind of the all company newsletter. Again, it's curated, but you want to have, you go in and create this environment with all these parts that are relevant to that broad community. But then you can be very specific, have a communication site for a very, like a project team or a cross-organizational team, and have a group stream out of Yammer as part of that conversation. Oh, I think his face is grayed out. We may have temporarily lost him.
He'll come back in.
All right.
Yeah.
It's really warm here. I shouldn't have frozen.
Oh, there he is. Okay.
And we managed to get Alistair Fusion as well. And from where are you now, Alistair?
I'm in Bahrain.
Oh, right. My goodness.
Yeah, so we're an hour ahead of South African time. So it's 12:21 a.m. Right here, and their work week starts on a Sunday. So I'm 3 days in already.
Right. So you've been in the SharePoint scene for a bit too, Alistair. What were the sort of things that stood out to you from the summit? What do you think is going to make the biggest impact?
OneDrive. OneDrive, definitely. 3 out of 4 of my customers are having the OneDrive conversation. They're not even talking SharePoint. I'm actually dealing with a bank right now that's got 130 branches across 5 countries. And their biggest thing is, we're talking OneDrive. SharePoint's somewhere in the background, but we're talking OneDrive. That would be the biggest impact that we're going to see, or that I'm seeing since the conversations around the summit, is specifically OneDrive. Yes, communication sites are there, and all of these things, and the freshness and the user interface around everything is now modern, and that's fantastic for us. But from a usability perspective, I think OneDrive is going to have a huge impact on the way our people consume content going forward.
Awesome.
Yeah,
So
I have to agree with you there.
Pretty well.
I think that's Mark. Go on in, Mark.
I was just going to say, it sounds like the files on demand, the improvements with sync, the user interface with OneDrive and everything, sounds like it landed well, and obviously that team has already been, firing in all pistons. So that's great to hear.
Yeah, so files on demand. Has everyone got to grips with what that is? I mean, we've all had the pains of OneDrive for Business not working so well based on Groove. It was having trouble syncing. You often had these errors that you had to fix and the like. But over the last year or so, they've really stabilized that and brought it into more of a Windows experience. So just to recap what Files on Demand is all about, is do you remember the pointer files we used to have where we could say, I want to download that file, but it's not on my machine yet? So we had this representation of our OneDrive with a number of different pointer files. And the file wasn't actually on our machine. We'd have to double click it and download it. And Files on Demand is a return to that, but with another level of control, and also support to the Mac clients as well. So OneDrive is now truly becoming that multi-platform experience of taking your files around with you. And I agree with Alistair that while we have a number of different communications features and things that can make our intranet pop or make it really easy for us to use our intranets and publish to them, from a user perspective, it's really important to be able to help them transition into the likes of Office 365 and into a SharePoint file experience. And OneDrive client really plays a big role in that.
The question I actually have, Mark, and maybe you can, maybe you can't answer, but I'm seeing the for business branding slowly dropping off OneDrive. So one of the things that we MVPs laughed quite merrily at when OneDrive and OneDrive for Business were introduced to the world, we went, well, that's two drives. But now we're seeing that OneDrive.exe, as Daryl said, is replacing Groove.exe. But even inside File Explorer, it no longer says OneDrive for Business -company name.
Yeah, there's.
I was thinking of putting NDA there.
Now, if anything could happen else apart from laptops and my story, we now have to leave the building.
Oh.
So, thank you to my online audience.
OneDrive.
We're going to do the safe thing and leave.
Yeah, we'll keep chatting.
Yeah, we might
For
even
the
leave
people
it
who aren't in the room.
So
yeah,
we'll leave it streaming.
well, Daryl, maybe you can mute.
Actually, I'm going to try and dial in from Skype for Business out on the street, so we might be able to still be part of this. Just a moment.
Yeah, Daryl, can you mute though?
I was just going to say, hey, Alistair, this is kind of
Daryl,
par for the
mute.
course. You and I together. I'm telling you.
Definitely, mate, definitely.
Of course this was going to happen.
Wait. This can continue for our online audience, so you guys keep going. We'll try and join from the street.
But can you mute the mic?
Keep it up,
Thank you.
guys. Ask lots of questions from Mike.
Mute the mic.
Really can't hear.
Mute the mic? Okay.
Yeah, hang on. We'll do that. Maybe.
Anyway, so for those who can hear, so yeah, I guess the question was around the unification of OneDrive for clients and branding. Is that something you can speak about? Like, I'm seeing it happen. So is there something a little bit more definitive as to when that is happening? Or we would start calling it OneDrive?
I don't think it's anything that's definitive that's happening, but I think to just note what is happening. You've got the consolidation of a lot of things. Starts with the engineering teams now are all part of Office under Jeff Teeper. It used to be Windows and Office. So engineering teams are coming together. The application itself, if you look at the mobile app, is now just the OneDrive app, and you sign into whatever service you use, and that might be one or the other or both. And certainly if you have both, it's a really great experience. I'm a dual user, if you want to think of it that way. The other thing that's coming together, of course, is the sync client. That's the hugest focus for them, to be able to bring in one sync client that rules them all to sync OneDrive for Business, OneDrive Consumer, SharePoint Online sites. They've already listed as what they're working on for the future to be able to tackle on-premises as well. And, of course, they support the duality of the Groove.exe and the OneDrive.exe by nature of if you still need it. Of course, you can run them in parallel. From a branding perspective, certainly when you look at SharePoint Server 2016, SharePoint Online, standalone instances of just OneDrive, the notion of that you're a part of Office 365 is inherent in some ways. When you look at it from a development perspective, they have now a single common API endpoint that takes you to both consumer and business. So the distinction between it is more you scope it if you're using from a custom perspective. We scope it knowing that you're in Office 365, so that's that instance of OneDrive in Office 365. And similar to the pattern of SharePoint and SharePoint Online, sometimes you can just say it's SharePoint in my Office 365 environment, or I'm using SharePoint because you might just be in the cloud. So it does simplify branding a little bit. I wouldn't say we've completely gotten rid of the for business, because sometimes to tack it on helps to clarify what you're talking about. But more and more, from an app, from a sync, from an API perspective, it is a singular entity that, of course, then you either log into one or both, or flip between one and two. So it's not a great answer as far as like being able to definitively say yes or no, but the progress the team has been making, the direction that they're going, we'd love to be able to just position it as one drive, not the joke of two drives. But the reality is, it is different zones, different use cases, and lots of different people out there. Some people who are not Office 365 customers obviously think of OneDrive as something different than what you all on the call might think of OneDrive.
So Mark, just on the back of OneDrive,
on the back of OneDrive is SharePoint.
Just a question around that, because you've got essentially two drives. Are you seeing compliance regulations coming through? So we know that the GDPR is quite big, and it expands into the US and the rest of the world. Are you finding questions around, well, if it's in OneDrive for business, I secure it myself because I manage the content, but if it's just personal OneDrive, is there an issue around that? Is there conversation in that space?
I actually think we've got a really good answer there, and it's not just a marketing answer, it's the reality. An end user might perceive X or Y as things they give permissions, they can create their own documents, share them, be autonomous in the sense of getting work done. But from a compliance security risk, like the Brad Smith and the level at which he would talk to customers, it is, and I joked before that it's backed by SharePoint, but that is it. The content service that provides the content service to OneDrive, to SharePoint Online, to Office 365 group files, to team files in Microsoft Teams, to files soon in Yammer, anywhere where there's a document or a file that's stored in one of those endpoints, the back end is SharePoint, and that's fully compliant to Tier D. When you think of the level of which we manage risk, security, privacy for Office 365, from a content perspective, that is SharePoint's job, and it backs all of those services in an equal way. So to the security compliance officers of the world, you are reviewing SharePoint, even though you might be talking about OneDrive. When it comes to me being individually effective at my job, and I put a document and I create a document in OneDrive for Business, that means I can choose who I give permissions to that document for. But if some audit is being run on me and somebody locks down onto a legal hold the document in my OneDrive for Business, I can't control that. So there is levels of different scenarios, and certainly levels of security that when you're talking to an end user might be different than when you're talking to an admin.
And I guess to probably just stretch out that compliance aspect as well, and also kind of referring to Delve, because you've got the logo in the background. We talk about intelligent experiences and Delve and other things kind of surfacing content from people around us. Obviously, one of the challenges with things like groups and the whole self-service notion is that we will quite easily end up with duplication. So I've got a version of this file in my OneDrive, and it's also in that group and different places. So do you see that there'll be any intelligence built into I guess the platform from a content analysis to kind of say something like, and I know it's going to be quite difficult, but starting with something at least like a file name to say, hey, you've got this file name in these 3 different locations. Hey, admin, you might want to address that. Not necessarily just from a compliance, but, well, actually, probably yes, compliance, because maybe one of them is a non-controlled document. But yeah, just kind of surfacing that kind of duplication warning, I guess, if you will.
Yeah, there's definitely intelligence being built into different layers, and I think from an end user Delve type intelligence, you're not going to necessarily get that front and center. What will show probably isn't all 3 documents. It'll be the most active one that's most connected to the people that you work with. So there'll be the differentiation of what you see or what other people see based on that relationship activity, not just the fact that there are 3 of the same files. But from a reporting perspective, if there is that intelligent information that's going to basically raise awareness, which it sounds like part of what you're asking, I think that they are thinking through a lot of the different administrative ways to leverage intelligence. More of it is just, from a broader graph perspective, you will see patterns that evolve, and what are the types of patterns that would send an awareness type notification. There's a great presentation, and it's not directly related to your question or answer, but the context of it is there's a great presentation by a guy named Matt Swan, who used to be just a SharePoint security PM in SharePoint. Now he's a
Yeah, that's it, everyone. Thank you for your extreme patience with the presentation from hell. And it's still hot. It's still burning.
Right, still going. So yeah, we think for those that it wasn't just we think an alarm, just a kind of alert, like false thing. There's smoke out there.
Yeah.
So we might be standing outside the hotel here in lovely downtown Auckland, New Zealand. It's actually a nice day out. But I think that concludes the conversation.
The virtual summit was so hot that we couldn't even participate. We will tune in sometime again from Regarding Office 365 if this stream is still live. And thank you for attending this crazy experiment. Bye for now. I was just going into how OneDrive, the changes were so hot that, never mind, yeah. We've done the hot joke a few times now. Yeah.
Yes, it's not funny, but
No.
it's kind of emotional about that, actually.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I don't know if we're rebooting or what was the story?
I'm not, but yeah, are we still streaming there?
We are still streaming.
Okay. So for those, for the one or two sad people still watching.
Yeah, the ones that can somehow drown out a fire alarm and focus on the content.
Yeah, just be professional, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Let me see, what can we do here? I think what we'll try and do is also just bring up...
Do some Q&A?
Yeah, let's do that.
Is there another mic? Is there a name on the street mic here?
Another street mic? Look, you use this one, I'll use this one over here. Is yours on?
It is. I can walk around. Use this as an interview mic. Do you have any questions about the announcements that were made? In the summit? Yeah, report.
Not specifically from the summit, but just before they announced the improvements in the sync forms.
Yes.
Going up to 400 characters for Alex and his.
Yeah, that's right.
Why only 400?
Do you need more?
I got lawyers that have big long names, big long photo names, big long file names.
Yeah.
I think it's a Y3K issue.
A what? A Y3K issue?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, fair question though. And I don't know the answer. I remember someone saying, how do we know when we've got this update? You know, how do you really test that? And so there was a friend of mine based in Singapore who said, well, this is what you do. You create a folder with 10 characters and you keep creating it and drop your document in. So I think he said it actually is up to 420 something characters. Why there no more, I'm not sure. We'll have to ask Mark. Oh wait, he's gone. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's a real issue. Like, I think that it's a positive thing that you now have more characters, because many organizations that are trying to shift their documents into the cloud aren't going to take that extra effort to try and abridge things or concatenate names that become so unrecognizable that you've got to give this environment that people still recognize when they come into the cloud. And you know, we're in a SharePoint conference, among other things as well, so I don't mean to say, you know, bad things about metadata, but it's important, but it's not the easiest thing to use, as we all know. And so if we can stick with folders and we have that extra length now that we can make use of.
In that same theme, though, one thing I just, again, ran into last night is that when you are sharing things out, that the grabbing a link, I think that they could use a shorthand.
Yes.
It's still excruciating. When you go and paste in some places, it's shortened, so it's like 30 characters of just alphanumeric nightmare.
Yeah.
But other places, it's still like, 200 characters of just alphanumeric nightmare.
Yeah, agreed. Actually, keeping with that theme, and feel free to throw some questions in too as we try and round this out, this exciting experience we've had. Part of the experience with OneDrive and across Windows, Mac, etc., is that you're going to be able to do the sharing experience wherever you are. It'll be the same experience. So if I go into File Explorer in Windows or Finder in Mac, or I'm on OneDrive in my browser, then I can go in and I can still have that same, how am I going to share this? Is it going to be a guest link? Is it going to be shared explicitly with someone? Is it just internal? I saw this appear because I'm on a first release tenant and saw it appear. I thought, oh, what's going on here? But the idea is that that same experience will be across your device,
right.
consistent.
Yep. Any other questions? Anything that stood out? Questions that you had from watching the summit?
Any news on branding? When, if at all, will we be able to brand the modern team?
As I understand it, it's hinged around the SharePoint framework and that release. I confess I'm not a coder or developer, but I know that it's going to be best to stick to the rules. Early on, of course, when 365 came out, people were trying to do the branding, finding various ways around to make it happen and work, and then Microsoft would change something in their offering or the platform, and it would all break again. And so as long as you're sticking to the framework, then that branding is going to be consistent.
And I know this is not an answer to that as well. It's not an answer to that question. Well, one of my thoughts on that issue, watching the announcements around the communication sites, was using the communications site pages and the images that are default in that view to do some of that branding there. So that's kind of an in-between, but it's a way to incorporate some of that into it without having to go and code something. So yeah, that's a great question. There's actually an article that I'm writing where I've got input from Randy Driscoll, from Tom Daly at B&R Business Solutions, and I'm reaching out to a couple of Microsoft people to specifically talk about that. So that should be out in about a week rather than magazine. We have another question over here.
Yeah, just on the subject of sharing again, if it's going to become easier, is it still going to be obvious to people that they break inheritance if they possibly share to someone directly? So the whole security scheme is broken on that document, and other people may not be able to see.
Yeah, honestly, I hadn't revisited that since hearing about the sharing announcements, and I've observed the same thing. If you're trying to set up this inheritance and you go and break it with that explicit, I'm sharing it with someone. I don't think that anything has changed there in that respect. They are trying to make it, or in a sense, dumb it down, so it's as simple as this document, I want to share it with these individuals or an Office 365 group. So drop in a security group of sorts, or save it off into that area as well. So yeah, good observation. Probably another.
There's a lot of room, a lot of opportunity to go and make changes there, because a lot of concerns of governance of content. If a document that's in a secure place within SharePoint is then exactly that, shared out somehow, that you need to be warned that it's going from the secure, that you've now included a name that is external, that you're going to break that inheritance. But similar would be to share, what if you move that document over to a place that's going to be shared in a communication site that's open to a broad group, or in a Yammer group, or wherever that is. And I think there's opportunity in being able to see that. And that's, in the past, that has been an ISV opportunity to go in some of these governance tools to look and say, well, here's duplicate content, or here's content that's been shared, here's a report of content, where it was, how it was opened, and where there were security changes. So I think there's, again, we don't know the answers to this stuff. I think I look at that stuff and I say, well, that's an interesting blog post to go and explore. Not that we have the answers, but to ask those questions and get some feedback from Microsoft. Any other questions?
Who's interested in the Power Apps and Flow aspect of SharePoint? A few here, yeah. So was that the same hands that were raised were also so saddened by InfoPath being faded out? Yeah, maybe not. So yeah, there's a few things that have been brought into the new SharePoint experience. With that, being able to launch flow directly from a library or a list, and there was a really good demonstration of how that worked. So that was following in the path of InfoPath, if I can string those words together. Yeah, but that's
Just to stay with the flow. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say that even at the MVP Summit, where they announced Power Apps and Flow 2 years ago, so November, a year and a half ago, it was one of the better received technologies. People were excited about that and the path to that. So I think people are generally excited about any news that happen around that. I think it's Microsoft definitely moving in the right direction.
And there's this concept of connectors across a number of the different services now too. So with 365 groups under it, you probably may have attended Ben's session, so I won't recap about what groups are. But connectors, in a sense, are also making a lot possible. So Flow is following the same trait, that now they've got a connector that allows them to get into Teams and do various things with documents there. And so it's all about connecting these services and giving us a lot more power. And I think, as I understand it, that's where InfoPath was lacking. You couldn't connect out to these different external services to grab that content, bring it into SharePoint, or vice versa.
Sorry, you just mentioned about group for a brief moment over there. So I had a burning question. Now, I know, right? Okay. So with Planner, so when you're creating Planner or when you're creating OneNote, let's say you name it digital conference, somewhere down the line you want to rename it to SharePoint conference. How can you actually rename it so that it renames the URL on the top as well? Because it gets stuck. You're stuck with the book ID. So is there a way to rename the book ID so that it changes the URL on the top?
Not an easy way, no, because if I could draw it out, and I would if I had my Surface plugged in, as you're creating the name of a group, it provisions a site, provisions Planner, provisions various different things. Now that all seems magic to us on the user side. We think, wow, this is great. There are delays as that sort of thing happens. And that's because they are still each individual service. You've got SharePoint behind it, Planner, the other things they keep tacking on. So any of that renaming has to forward sync. And unfortunately, they haven't cracked that one quite yet. Yeah.
And also, if you change the URL to break any links that go to it. So,
yeah.
Yeah, and I see one new thing in Office 365 at the moment. One new thing in Office 365 I've noticed is that when you rename even a folder under a library in SharePoint, if you don't lose the URL like you did back in 2010, you've got something back in that's maintaining that, which is really good.
Actually, that's a case for the ugly URL. Okay? There are some ugly URLs, but there's like this great ugly.
But it's my ugly URL.
Yeah. And it will stay yours. Right.
So you can rename the top file and it won't matter because it's an ugly URL.
Exactly.
Any other questions to stand?
My apologies if we've already covered this. I think listeners who are either SharePoint on-prem or potentially looking at the review that Chris and his team have written, I had a scan through that last night. There's obviously a significant portion of the SharePoint community that are on-prem or hybrid. Where do these sorts of announcements fit into that model, given that is it 2/3 are either hybrid or on-prem? Are we really looking at advances that are going to impact my mind?
Yeah, it's a commonly asked question. What about SharePoint on-prem? And you see now the order of things is, let's try this in the cloud. Let's leverage everything there that might be Azure or groups or other things that are never really going to make it to on-prem. I don't see the likes of Planner coming to on-prem. They then make that decision about what is it going to come down.
Was there anything specific that we can talk about that is one that they've already flagged that this is going to on-prem? So for instance, OneDrive on-demand files will be a
Yeah, I think I've seen a question in the community that targeted that OneDrive and whether it's going to work on-prem for files on demand. I've actually seen the answer that even that is just cloud-based.
Well, so one thing is I can say just kind of broadly about some of the communications. About the communications is that Microsoft, it's not just the study that my team did that Microsoft was the lead sponsor of. There were cloud adoption surveys too that were done, an internal and the external one. I don't know if anybody saw that. It was actually Julia White, who's now corporate vice president, who's a long time been GM that we pointed to, and used to own SharePoint. She's over on the Office and Azure side now. But so it's her face on the video about this broader hybrid and cloud adoption initiative. Microsoft company-wide is strengthening their information and communications around hybrid. Now, having said that, I mean, with all of this, in fact, we had a podcast, myself and Dean Swan did a podcast interview with Jeff Keeper. We spent about 45 minutes, and that topic came up about providing better information for it. What I am aware of, and I want to speak for the product team, but that they are building out content specifically around that. You're going to see the word hybrid. They're not running and hiding from it because their salespeople are pushing primarily cloud. I think it's being more broadly accepted that, hey, hybrid is around, it's here for a long time. It's going to maybe permanently here as part of our solutions. And they're building content around that. Now, what I would say is that there are other vendors like AvePoint that are going and building community resources. And I'm only bringing that up because I'm involved with that, helping AvePoint. And there's a number of different vendors that are doing it as kind of a community effort, building content to help understand the hybrid scenarios around anything that comes out. So I think this is an opportunity for community members, for us to do that. And a new announcements have been made. Look at it through the lens of hybrid and say, is this an impact, is it not? What's the roadmap for hybrid if there is one? And if there's a gaping hole for us to provide feedback. And as a community as well, you see something, you really want it, you're in a hybrid environment or on-prem, to ask the question, and if it's a necessity for your business, to provide that feedback through user voice, through the proper channels. But again, just kind of recap, Microsoft is trying to get better about their communications around hybrid and what is supported in hybrid and on-prem environments. But I think you're going to see it faster and more in-depth coming from the community over the course of this year. It's one of the reasons why I have been wanting to do this study for a couple of years now. And I think I look at it as Microsoft is finally caught up with what the community has been saying for years, that hybrid is important, and we need to better understand, as all these new announcements come out, what is the hybrid story behind each one of those. I don't say things in a small amount of words, sorry.
No, I like those words.
Any other questions? Anything else that jumped out?
I have two questions related to SharePoint model tool sets and pages. So one is, what about the subsets? We use modern experience in the root track or whatever subsets because they seem to be more important as well. Second is whole search experience. Even though we say Dell or Microsoft Graph to be used for search, but SharePoint Search Center is still really important, especially if we talk about hybrid search. And we haven't seen much modern experiences. So my question is, any new roadmap or any solutions or any best practices in that space?
Yeah, it's not something that I'm across. Can't admit to know the answers for that. I mean, around your question around modern sites and the look and feel, and so as you're creating sub-sites, you're still seeing the classic site. That may be an indication that it's still rolling out to you as a default experience. I know that some sites that I've wanted to flip over from classic to modern, I've had to go in and create a new homepage and say, I want to use the new experience. So that could be an indication there. In terms of the search side of things and having a modern experience, yeah. I actually am taking my cues now from how Christian dealt with that, because I can't speak for the product group, but I can only assume that a number of these things are cloud first and then on-prem, and that they're trying to drive some of that search back to really taking advantage of the search capabilities in the cloud and search within Azure as well. I can see someone in the audience I know that probably knows a lot more, Alan. So if you've got any comments to pass on that, no?
All I can say is there hasn't been any announcements about what they're doing. So there's not been any announcements about what they're doing with the search center. So that's going to stay as is for a time being. But they're just trying to extend the Delve experience, because they will see fruits and literally a lot of people going there and trying to buy content that way. So they're trying to make that better so you can find people with content and things through there rather than go to the search center. The search center becomes a more corporate, more search.
Yeah, I know that the partner ecosystem is still thriving there with solutions. So, yeah, I talk with sort of Jeff Fried over BA Insight on a regular basis, once a week or so. Talk about, so he's kind of my go-to expert on all things search. And I think similar answer, like we don't know because we haven't been any specific information that I'm aware of that I'm privy to. I'm sure Microsoft, the product team always has these behind closed doors conversations with a bunch of those partners and vendors that have expertise in that area, but neither of us are search experts per se.
And if you can judge the pace of these things being released, there's a lot new that comes out, but then we look at it and go, it's not quite there yet, it's not complete. Where are my multi-column layouts for my modern sites? And so they are coming. They haven't forgotten them, but they're often just released gradually. So
yeah, because there is, it's an iterative process where they're going out doing a limited release, or it'll be a preview, or they're doing a limited release to certain tenants, get the feedback from that, then run the span, get that feedback, run the span of the deployment. And so I think it's a smart way to go and do that, so you don't just spring something brand new that's not yet received feedback from customers to everyone. So it's a smart way of doing that. But sometimes when you hear about things and see things, and I'm on first release this week as well, but even with the first release tenants, we get very anxious when we hear about something new. They say it's going to first release tenants, but even then it comes in waves. And so I'll see people talking about something that's not yet on my tenant. It's been 6 hours since they announced it. Why don't I see it yet?
It's always like question number 2 on the blog post. When are we getting this? And if they haven't answered it in FAQs, I don't bother asking. I know that it's going to arrive and it arrives. Yeah.
Any other questions? You have that opportunity.
No, it's a discussion point because Alan probably already knows the answer.
Yeah. No, so the flow and the idea that you can just run an approval workflow. What I didn't see, because I didn't get up before I introduced, was are those essentially going to replace the templates that you currently get from SharePoint Designer? There's an approval one, there's a review one.
Yeah,
so
yeah. They do have some templates that they demonstrated around the approval flow. So yeah, those are going to be available in there for people to just use out of the box. And it's going to be a way for those who aren't familiar with Flow yet to start to get into looking at the detail there. Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing, just on that comment about looking at the point, it's available on demand. So if you did miss it and want to go back and watch that, I encourage you to go and do that because they did cover a lot.
Let's have a little honesty in the room, okay? Who did get up early or even just watch the delayed coverage? There you go. Did you all expect to come along and get a virtual summit right here?
Yes.
Abysmal failure.
I highly recommend you go. It's an hour long, but it's pretty action-packed. And it's also, for those that know the name, Naomi Moneypenny, it was her, she's a brand new Microsoft employee now. If you didn't know that, if you know that name, but, and so had her on screen doing some of the demos and looking at the whole there. So.
You know what I liked about her demo, and you don't often see this when people do the mobile demos, they're often like tapping away there and doing things. She just hit the microphone and spoke to it, and it just went that. I'm like, yeah, Done deal.
If you don't know who Naomi is, by the way, so she's a brilliant woman. She has like 30 or 40 patents.
She's literally a rocket scientist.
She is a rocket scientist. And Microsoft has been making some brilliant hires from the community. Dan Hall and Naomi and others. So very exciting to see. And so if you've got questions about machine learning, like she is the expert. And so we're going to see a lot out of that. So it's worth going and watching it on demand. It's 1 hour, see all those demos. And then of course you can also go through the videos. There's actually on the...
the Microsoft Mechanics, they have a playlist which will take you in depth into some of these, so definitely check that out. I think it's all there on the blog post at the bottom.
You just go to YouTube, the Microsoft Mechanics video and on that playlist for Office. And it has all of those lined up. I don't remember how many demo videos.
I think there was 7 or 8. Yeah, good watching.
Yep.
We did get the word that morning tea is available, so we could take one more question.
In terms of public sector using OneDrive, where does it fall for retention and disposal as well?
The archive and retention for OneDrive? Oh.
Labels.
Say it again? Labels, right, labels are new-ish, aren't they? Yeah, so you're now able to put across even across the site all the content and indicate when you want this to expire, similar to the Exchange experience. I believe it is a an Enterprise 5 feature. So if you're using Enterprise 3 or E3 license for Office 365, you'll need to beef up to get that capability.
And then that's just the automation.
Oh, okay.
So actually detecting on language.
So it's not just when am I going to get it, but am I covered? Then can I get those goodies? Yeah, often the question. Look, thank you very much for a very
sticking through it.
Interesting session and actually coming back. Yeah, I don't know what our online audience is like, but that made for some good fun.
Definitely go watch this on demand later. Not to be missed.
Fast forward between about minute 20 and But yeah, thanks everyone, and enjoy morning tea. That's crazy.
Good job.
Thank you.
Good follow through. Look at that.
Yeah, that's a beastie. If I had everything had fell into place. The phone would have been there. This microphone would have been hanging off there.
Yep.
You get it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, what's cool is the smooth that I have, it has the third joint now. So and so it's automated, and you could literally just go around 3D, and the camera just stays steady.
Yeah, similar.
Just a very quick little question. Metadata. There's a lot of things on metadata. One of our frustrations is different areas of Microsoft provide visibility to metadata and other.
Your call will be disconnected. Your call will be disconnected. Your call will be disconnected. Your call will be